just a reminder of what it means. The power and authority to deliver and set you free. No other name can do that, but until people come to that realization, it's like they'll call upon any other name, any other name. They'll call on money, they'll call on power, they'll call on drugs, they'll call on material things, they'll call on all these other things, but those things have no power to deliver. No. Truly deliver. And if you have all of those things in the world, the bad news is there's always somebody more powerful. There's always somebody with more money. There's always somebody with more authority. There's always somebody with more. And even if they don't have it, quote unquote, they can take it. Somebody out there is not going to follow the rules. Somebody out there, but you see, God follows his own rules. Jesus is the rule maker. He's the ruler. You can't go outside of his rules. What he says happens. What he says goes. If he says it, it's going to happen. Amen. Amen. Our scriptures this morning. We read Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 28, but we're going to actually cover we read Matthew 16, verses 13 through 18. That's what we read. But we're actually going to cover Matthew 16, 13, and go all the way through Matthew 20, verse 28. And we've been talking about the life and ministry of Jesus as he came, as he walked this earth, as he ministered, as he left heaven with the purpose of coming down to give his life to restore us into improved, more intimate relationship with God, launching us from the garden to the cross. The relationship improvement plan that God had. Amen. So we talked about the presentation of the king. We talked about the proclamation of the king. We talked about the power of the king. Last week we talked about the progressive rejection of the king. This week it's the preparation of the king's disciples. The preparation of the king's disciples. Like I said, we talked last week about the progressive rejection of Jesus. John the Baptist, he was rejected because he preached Jesus. Jesus was rejected because he preached a message different from the message that was preached by the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. Because his message was a message of love. His message was a message of relationship with God. His message didn't exalt himself. His message didn't took the authority out of the Pharisees' hands and put it back in God's hands. Brought it back to where it was supposed to be. So he was rejected by the religious leaders. He was rejected by the church, those who should have been in the know, those who should have been the first to gather around, those who should have been the first to receive him. And so his rejection was progressive in that once the leaders rejected him, the people began rejecting him. But in spite of all the rejection that Jesus experienced, Jesus was still able to minister. Jesus was still able to preach. He was still able to teach. He was still able to perform miracles. He was still able to heal because the rejection he didn't let the rejection hinder him. He didn't let the rejection cause him to question who he was. God himself, he knew who he was. He knew what his purpose was. At the baptism, the Holy Spirit came down, landed on his shoulder, and God said, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." So the enemy had to come and attack. The enemy had to come and try to get Jesus to question his identity, question his purpose for being here. Should I have come? Should I have even come? Because I'm being rejected by more than a receiving me. The rejection is by quantity greater than those who are receiving. But it's the ones who receive that made it worth it. It was the ones who were saying yes, the ones who were following, the ones who were coming unto him, who were demonstrating faith. They made it worth it. The rejection It was heavy and it was quite a lot, but it didn't. The amount of rejection over the acceptance, the amount of the sheer volume of the rejection by who it came from and how many people it came from couldn't outweigh the people who received and demonstrated faith and demonstrated love. It couldn't be. I'm stuttering again. He couldn't be deterred. Amen. By the rejection. Amen. The faithful few far outweigh the rebellious, the rejecting masses.
All right.
It just can't happen. It just can't happen. So now we have Jesus preparing his disciples. And in preparing his disciples, he covers two areas. The first one is the revelation in view of the rejection. And the second area is his instruction to the disciples in view of the rejection. He's preparing his disciples for his departure. He's preparing his disciples for the ministry that they will undertake after he departs. So the first thing he does is he does a revelation. And after that he instructs them. In the revelation in view of the rejection, that's covered in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, and it goes through Matthew chapter 17, verse 13. And the verses we read, chapter 16, verses 13 through 17, where he asked them, who do men say that I am? Who do men say that I am? So, after all this rejection that it has culminated. It's going to continue, but it is culminated. So Jesus he's beginning to prepare the disciples for his departure, for the ministry that they're going to pick up after he's gone, after he ascends into heaven for that final time. So he asked them, who do men say that I am? And he got their answers. Because he really knew what they were, what men were saying. So he just wants to probe the disciples for who do you say I am? That's the more important thing to Jesus. Who do we say he is? Who do we say he is? Just like in the Psalms where David is constantly declaring who God is in his life. Where David is constantly saying, Lord, you are my fortress. You're my shield. You're my buckler. You're my hiding place. You're the cleft in the rock. You are all of these things to me. He's declaring who God is because that's how he demonstrates to God. You know, God called David a man after his own heart, a man in pursuit of God's heart. And God knew that because David continually declared who God was. Even in his down times, even in his messed up times, even after he received the word from Nathan, you're the man. He didn't wallow in it. He didn't wallow in his sin. He got up and he dusted himself off and pressed back on. He didn't wallow in it. So here it is. Jesus asking the disciples, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Wow. It is a blessed are you because man didn't reveal this to you. You didn't get this. You didn't get that by, you and the other 11 sitting down and, reasoning together. You got that because it was the revelation that for Peter being everything that he was, cutting off ears, and he hadn't done that yet to this point. But Peter being the one who got on the boat, and began to sink. Peter being the one just always putting his foot in his mouth, basically. But Peter also being the one who said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed are you, Peter, because something sunk in. Because, wow, something sunk in. So he goes on. That's the revelation of the person of the king. Because we're still talking about the revelation in review of the rejection. So the revelation of the person of the king, that was chapter 16, verses 13 through 17. Next he goes on to reveal the program of the king. And the program of the king. It's covered in Matthew chapter 16, verses 18, and that goes through chapter 17, verse 13. First, he starts off with the revelation of the church in Matthew chapter 16, verses 18 through 20. Which we just talked about. He says, on this rock, the rock of the truth, not the rock that is Peter. Because Jesus didn't come to establish his church built on any man. He came to establish his church on the truth. And the truth is that Jesus is the Son of the living God. He says, on this I will establish my church. I will build my church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. So it's there that he's establishing the church. He's revealing that what the church is going to be when the church follows, when the church believes, when the church begins to grow the way the church is going to after he's gone. Next, he goes on in verse 21 through 23, and he goes on to talk about his death. Verses 24 through 26, he talks about the revelation of his reward. What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? That's keeping a kingdom perspective on everything. Because that's kind of what we were talking about earlier, how I know a name. And if you know that name, then it has the power and authority to deliver you and set you free. It has the power and the authority to take the value out of everything earthly. To take not the value out of it, but the seductiveness out of it. If you know Jesus, then you're not gonna give everything to get this car. If you know Jesus, you're not gonna give everything to get this job. If you know Jesus, you're not gonna give everything to be able to make all the money. Because without Jesus, you can gain all of that and lose your soul. What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? That's what the world is doing without Jesus. What does it profit a man? What does it profit a man? I can look and see anywhere in the world how a person doesn't know Christ, makes no confession of Christ. In fact, will deny that there is even a God in heaven. But they have cars way beyond what they could ever drive. They have money beyond what they could spend in a lifetime. They've gained the world. But if they don't receive Christ as Lord and Savior, lost their soul. He's lost his soul. And on that day when he stands before the Lord, and he says, did you receive my son? Well, no, but, I had all this money. I had all this other stuff. I even helped the poor, with all my money. God says, okay, well, we'll put that through the test. That's his act will be tried by fire. And we talked earlier about doing it by faith. Whatever you do by faith, any act done by faith, that's an act that will stand the trial of fire. Because if it's done for any other purpose than giving God glory, any other purpose than exercising your faith, then it won't survive the fire. Come out as ashes on the other side. So, the richest person in the world who helps feed all these people, who builds house for the homeless, who donates, who builds children's hospitals and all this other stuff, if it's not to the glory of God, it was good and you helped a lot of people and good on you, but you're going to stand before the Lord and it's going to come out as ashes. Who do men say I am? You are the rock. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's the confession that needs to come out of the mouths of men. That's the confession that he's working towards. And Jesus, again, like he said, he talks about his death. He He talks about the reward of Jesus. He goes on in verses 27 and 28 of chapter 16, and he talks about the second coming. And then we get to chapter 17, verses 1 through 13, where the transfiguration takes place. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John out away from the others. They look up. And Jesus' form is transfigured. He's no longer that earthly body, but he's in a glorified state. Not just him, but there's others there. There's two more. He says Moses and Elijah are now there. Ironic that Elijah was one of the ones, because that's who some of the people said Jesus was. Some say you're Elijah. Some say you're Elias, who has come back. No, not yet. But you have Moses and Elijah showing up. The two of the preeminent prophets and forefathers in the Old Testament, purveyors of the word. Moses, through Moses, God penned the law. And Elijah was the prophet who spoke a lot about the coming of Christ. Isaiah, Elijah, pretty much all of them did, actually. But Elijah, one of the prime prophets. So they look up and Peter, good old Peter again. Lord, this is a good thing that we see this. We should build temples for everybody. No. That's not why we're here. That's not why we're here. And even after that, Jesus says, after it's all said and done, he says, don't tell everybody about this till after I'm ascended. Don't tell everybody this, because again, they won't be able to handle it. It won't have the same meaning while I'm here. So just wait until I'm gone before you share this. And that was all part of the preparation. Interesting that it was just Peter, James, and John, because if you will, that was Jesus' inner circle of the disciples. He called all 12. He poured into all 12 of them, but when he needed his intimate time, when he asked those to come pray with him, it was Peter, James, and John. It was always Peter, James, and John. Peter and James and John, his inner circle. John, the disciple whom he loved. Not necessarily his favorite, because Jesus didn't play favorites. He didn't have a favorite. But he says, John, the disciple whom he loved. Peter, who would eventually stand up at Pentecost. Peter, the one who messed up seemingly more than anybody. Peter, who cut off an ear. Peter, whom Jesus called Satan. Get thee behind me, Satan. Peter was a part of the inner circle of John and James. So he called these three to come and experience the transfiguration. So after he tells them the transfiguration, after the transfiguration occurs, everything's back to normal, if you will. He tells them, don't say anything about this until after I'm ascended. So that was Jesus' preparation of the disciples. Now, beginning in chapter 17, verse 14, Jesus begins his instruction in view of all the rejection that took place. Jesus, he's been pouring into his disciples every moment from the moment he called them, even up until this very moment. But now his instruction is in view of the rejection that has taken place. Now, because basically it to the world, to the naked eye, it would seem that his ministry has taken a turn because of this rejection, because of all the rejection that's taken place. See, that's the rubber meeting the road, if you will, for a ministry. While it's easy, while you're in the growing, while you're in the doing, and you're out inviting people, and people might be coming, and you're doing all these programs, you've got all these things going. It's good. Nobody's questioning God. There's no doubt. There's no fear in anyone. But now rejection begins to come. Now rejection begins to come. And rejection being what it is. Rejection isn't just a no. It's not just a no. Rejection is, it's beyond no. It's no and you're wrong because of this. It's no and a lie. It's no and slander. It's no and contention. It's no and a flat out rebellion. That's rejection. You know, we narrow it down and we confine it to just a no. Well, they rejected me. Oh, okay, yeah. But the kind of rejection that Jesus was encountering wasn't a no. It wasn't just a no. It was no and. It was no and. And because it was no and, if it had just been no, Jesus wouldn't even have to address it to the disciples. He wouldn't even have to. It's because that's just the nature of the beast. Because even when he sent them out, he says, you know, if this town sends you, you send out the spirit of peace and the town rejects it, you just, shake it off, get the dust off the hills and press on. If that, but that's rebellion, that's rejection. But what's going on here now? Rejection, no and. All this no and. Now he's got to reveal himself through his teaching, through all the things that he said and did, talking about the church, talking about his death, talking about his reward, the prophecy of his second coming and the transfiguration, all of that. He's basically revealing another level of himself to the disciples in review of all the rejection that's taking place. Now a whole other level of instruction is taking place. Through all of this, look through, if you go through chapter 17, verse 21, all the way through chapter 20, verse 28, looking through those, all those headings and everything, it's all instruction, not one parable. Not one parable. See, the parables, we said before, the parables were like the seed, were like bait to draw people in. The parable was so that whoever would hear it, if they just hear it and be like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting, and then press on. Somebody would hear the parable and be like, well, what does that really mean? Come and ask Jesus, what does that really mean? Okay, he's not throwing out bait now. He's flat out instructing them in view of all the rejection that has just taken place. Chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. It's the account of Jesus healing a boy with a demon. But it turns out to be instruction on faith. I want to read through this real quick. It says, when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son. He said he has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. Oh, unbelieving and perverse generation, Jesus replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? This is in public. This is in front of people. He didn't pull them aside. He didn't wait till everything was calmed down and everything. This man has just told Jesus, I brought these men to your disciples, and they couldn't get it done for whatever reason. They couldn't get it done. Jesus had a full expectation, a full and right expectation that if they'd have brought it to, that since this man brought them to him, they should have been able to do it. At least one of them should have been able to do it. But his response was, well, it's not what we would have wanted it to be had it been us. See, we would have wanted Jesus to pull us aside. We would have wanted Jesus to wait till after service, till everybody was gone, call us in on Tuesday into his office, to sit us down, and he sits behind his desk and is like, well, the other day when the man came and had his son, and you couldn't heal him. What I would prefer that you have done in that situation would have been to, either come get me or, but you have the power to do it. We would have wanted it to be that way. Nobody wants to be brought out, called out in public like that. No, nobody does. I know I don't. No one wants to. But see, this is saying Jesus is instructing them in view of all the rejection that is taking place. Oh, you unbelieving and perverse generation. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Ouch. Bring the boy to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private. Now it's private. They came to him in private. Well, why couldn't we believe? Why couldn't we drive it out? And he replied, because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to here, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. And when they came together in Galilee, he said that the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life. And the disciples were filled with great grief, but they came to Jesus afterwards. They came to him in the private. Why weren't we able to? Because your faith was so small. Your faith was so small. And considering that we've just been through all this rejection, this time of rejection, their faith probably was small. But you see, Jesus did not. He used this teaching opportunity. He did not soft pedal it. He didn't water it down. He didn't soak it in milk. This was a teaching moment for them. This was a teaching moment because you had a man whose son was possessed. And there was a great need there that one of them should have been able to. But because of, and this is just me speaking right now, okay? Them having just gone through this time of rejection, seeing Jesus being rejected the way he was, saying his powers were by the devil, saying that, he's not the Son of God. All this rejection, you're a liar. You speak this, you're not of, and being questioned on all these different accounts. So now he's in a place where he's not there, and the disciples have the task of healing. And they couldn't do it. And he didn't pull any punches with them. He drove it home to them. This is an instruction on faith. You of little faith. You of little faith. You allowed that situation to affect. You allowed what you've been through. You've allowed, and you haven't even been through it. It's me. I've been through it. You just experienced it. And you allowed it to waver. You allowed it to shake your faith. We're going to go through hard times. We're going to experience rejection. We're going to experience rejection the way Jesus experienced it here. We can't be like him and not go through the things that he went through. But he's letting us know right now that there's no excuse for our faith to wane. There's no excuse for our faith to waver. Jesus did this to the disciples in public. He's letting us know we don't have an excuse. By faith, by faith, by faith. If the woman with the issue of blood could press through at the very risk of her own life and draw on his hem, then he's going to take no excuse. He's going to take no excuse from us. Why we allowed our faith to wane and waver like that. Moving on, he says, we go on to verse 22 and 23, which we read. He's talking more again about his death. Verses 24 through 27, instruction about taxes. Interesting that he talks about taxes in his preparing of the disciples, the preparation of the king's disciples. He's prepared himself to leave, and he's giving instruction on taxes. They entered the town, and Jesus and his disciples, this is verse 24, arrived in Canaan. The collectors of the 2 drachma tax said to Peter and asked, "Does your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. Then Peter came into the house, and Jesus was the first to speak, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the things of the earth, do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own or from others?" He said, "From others." And Peter answered, "Then the sons are exempt," Jesus said, "but so that we may not offend them. Go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch and open its mouth, and you will find 4 drachma. Take it and give it to them and pay mine and yours taxes." Wow, instruction on taxes in the midst of all the rejection. What he's telling them is, regardless of how they act, we still have an obligation to fulfill to do what it is that we have to do. They're not acting right. That doesn't give us an excuse not to do what it is we are required to do. Instruction about humility. Chapter 18, verse 1 through 5. This is at that time, Jesus came and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, "I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me." Humility is what's required. To be first, to be best. Not self-exaltation, not our own self-promotion, not anything like that. But what is required is, who will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? The disciples came to him with this. Seeing that Jesus is who he is. Seeing that Peter being able to say, "You are the Son of the Most High God. You are the Son of the living God here on earth." But they're asking, who is the greatest? Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? If you think about that question before you ask it, God is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So why would you have to ask? They weren't asking who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Who is not God, who is not part of the Trinity, the Godhead. What person is going to heaven is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. That's what they wanted to know. And Jesus knew that. He could discern that from what they were asking. By the fact that they even came and asked him that question. And no doubt they expected him to put out some list or something saying that this person who does this shall be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, or this person who does this. And so they could commit that list to memory and begin doing these things so that they could be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But Jesus throws them a curve. He says, if you make yourself like this child, if you are humble, then you shall be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He throws them that little curveball. Instruction in view of the rejection that took place. Because sometimes after we're rejected in this manner, we might have a tendency to want to do something to make ourselves feel better, to pump ourselves up, to make ourselves feel better about having been rejected. But Jesus is saying we must remain humble. We must remain humble. Take it for what it is, press on. But we have to remain humble. We have to remain like children. Then he goes on 16 through 20. He's talking about cause and offense. In verses 6 through 10 of chapter 18, he's talking about the punishment of others. Verses 11 through 14, he's talking about the parable of the lost sheep. So there was a parable in there. I misspoke earlier. He spoke the parable of the lost sheep. He spoke the parable of the offended brother. But it's all about offense. Cause an offense, be an offended. And he follows that up in chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, and he talks about forgiveness. The importance of forgiveness. Chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. And it's the parable of the unmerciful servant. And the whole thing about the parable of the unmerciful servant is that he was forgiven much. He was forgiven much. But when it came time for him to practice forgiveness for a considerably lesser amount than what he himself was forgiven, he did not exercise mercy. He did not exercise mercy. And because he did not, he brought upon judgment upon himself and upon his family. When you are forgiven by the king, when you're forgiven by your overseer, forgiven by the king, it is an atrocity to not exercise forgiveness, to not exercise mercy. Jesus reiterates this very principle in the model prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It's the same principle. Exercise it. Don't be that the mercy magnet. The person whose the first words out of their mouth are, forgive me, give me mercy, show me mercy. But when it's their turn to demonstrate or show mercy, it's not the first word out of their mouth. First word out of their mouth is I, me, my. So that's what Jesus is telling us. For as much as we would ask for it, give it that much, if not more. So that's his instruction on forgiveness. He goes on and talks about divorce. And as much as he's talking about the divorce itself, God always uses the example of marriage when he's talking about the relationship between us and him. We are his adopted children, but as our relationship with him. That's why Jesus is referred to as the bridegroom. And the church is his bride. Divorce is not acceptable. It brings condemnation. If we divorce ourselves from Christ as the church, as people, as the individuals who make up the body, if we leave the church, if we leave Christ, we have divorced him and bring ourselves into condemnation. Because with him, we're out of condemnation. We're into restoration. We're into salvation. We're into sanctification. We're into all the things that God brings us into because we have received him, because we accept him as Lord and Savior. But as soon as we divorce ourselves, as soon as we declare ourselves separated from, we step out of all of that and into condemnation, into eternal separation from God. So that is his instruction on divorce, because it can lead to your destruction. He's talking about now. We talked about causing offense. He's talked about forgiveness. He talked about divorce. In chapter 19, verse 16 through chapter 20, verse 16, he's talking about wealth. He's covering it all here. And he uses and through that we have the account of the rich young ruler who came running to Jesus, asking, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to be saved? Tell me the things I need to do. Remember who the rich young ruler was? He was a young man. He was of noble bloodline. He had a position. He was also well educated, highly looked upon. He was also very wealthy. The rich young ruler. He had it all. He had it all. So when he's coming to Jesus, finding out how he can add Christianity to his, plaques on the wall. Jesus says, have you kept the law? He was very proud of his answer. Yes, I've kept them from my youth. One check. He's preparing himself. He's already emptied out a spot on his wall so he can go ahead and hang his plaque because he's sure Jesus is going to give him that diploma, that certificate. It says, oh, okay, you're saved. You can add this to your, add this notch to your belt. Even as he answers all of Jesus' questions, Jesus now challenges him. Okay, if you will follow me, sell everything that you have and give to the poor. Get rid of everything that exalts you and lifts you up now and make it a habit to give of that to the poor, to those who are around you, who have less than you, who have need. And that broke his heart. Sent him away because he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. And there are commentators who say that rich young ruler was Barnabas, went on to become Barnabas of the Bible. We know that Barnabas later joined Paul in his ministry. So we know that if that be true, then something sunk in. Something sunk in. And it did change his heart. But at that moment, all the other stuff, all the materials, all the plaques, all the accolades, everything that he had was too much. Had too much value to him. Because he didn't yet have Jesus. He was speaking to Jesus himself. The very answer he's speaking to. And he couldn't even accept it from Jesus himself. So that lets us know that yes, there are times when we'll share the gospel. There are times when we will speak the truth of the word to folks, and they will just walk away. They will just walk away. But just as we learn here that if some of the commentators, if it be true, then we know that person walked away and became Barnabas, who accompanied Paul on missionary journeys. It went on to do great things and is canonized in the Word of God Himself. But even if it's not, we know that Jesus shared the truth of Him out of compassion to see this young man be saved, become a follower. And he walked away from Jesus. So people are going to walk away. People are going to walk away. People are going to hear the word and not receive it right there on the spot. But that should not serve as a deterrent for us. Because the enemy, if that be the case, then the enemy will send people our way to ask and then walk away. So that we'll become discouraged. So that we'll just stop sharing altogether. Not knowing that somebody might go on to be a Barnabas. But don't let it, we can't let it deter us. Chapter 19, verses 27 through 30. Talks about the apostles' reward. What I say? Yep, chapter 19, verses 27 through 30. And Peter answers him and says, "We have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" Jesus said to them, "I tell you the truth. At the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel, and everyone who has left houses or money or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last, and many who are last will be first. Jesus is letting us know whatever it is we sacrifice here, whatever it is that we give up, walk away from for him, we will get that much more. We will get that much more. As I'm saying, if we if we move away from family, God's not going to give us 100 times the family members or anything like that, but whatever it is that we walked away from, the security of family, the familiarity of family, all of that we walk with, whatever it is that we give up for his sake, that we will get 100 times over. That where he's taking us, what we're going to do is that he's going to give us that security 100 times over. He's going to give us that feeling that we missed 100 times over, but we have to be committed to him. We have to be committed to him. Because he said, if you do it, Jesus says, if you do it for my sake, not any man's sake, but you have to do it for Christ's sake, will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. We have inherited eternal life just by following Christ. But he's saying whatever it is we give up, whatever it is we feel like we've left behind that we're missing because we follow Christ, because we are following him and we're dedicated to him, that's the apostles' reward. That's the reward that we're getting. And remember, this is all in being shared in view of the rejection that is taking place. The world, the many, the masses are against you. They're saying all these things against you. But Jesus is saying, whatever you do, if you do it for me, if you do it for my cause, for my sake, you'll get so much more in return. Whatever it is the world's trying to weigh on you, God can give you that much more. Then he goes into the parable of the laborers, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. The workers in the vineyard. And it's simply saying that a farmer, a vineyard owner goes out and hires people. He hires some at 7 in the morning. He hires some at noon. And the work day ends at 5. Some he hired at 2 o'clock. Some he hired at 4:30. Everybody that worked that day got the same wage. Everybody that worked that day got the same wage. The wage that they agreed to now. Okay. But at the end of the day, the 7 o'clock workers come in and they're like, he started at 2 o'clock. Why does he get the same thing I get? Well, number one, because you agreed to that, so you're not changing it. You can't come in trying to change. Okay? And I'm the vineyard owner. I decide who gets what. Okay? These who came in at this time, they worked in the vineyard as well. So our flesh wants to say, well, I should get more than they do because I've been doing it longer. No. Doesn't work like that. The kingdom of heaven is as that vineyard owner. So that's saying that the person who's been saved for 65 years is the same thing as the person who got saved and then 2 days later stepped outside and got hit by a bus. You inherit the kingdom of heaven. You inherit the kingdom of heaven. So God is fair and equitable in all that he does. Verses 17 through 19 of chapter 20, he talks about he's giving more instruction about his coming death. And he finishes out his preparation of his disciples. Chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. says, then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons. And kneeling down, asked a favor of him. What is it you want, he asked. She said, grant one of these two sons of mine, that may sit at your right hand, and the other sit at your left in your kingdom. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink of the cup that I'm going to drink? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, no. You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right hand or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Jesus called them all together and said to them, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. He said it before. He would be first, must be last. And he's saying it again here. If you want to be great, if you will be great in the kingdom of heaven, if you want the great, you have to have a servant's heart. You want to sit at the right hand. You want the highest position. The highest position is that of servant. The highest position is that of servant. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. We might ask ourselves why we find ourselves in a position of helping others, why we find ourselves helping others. God has given us our opportunity to be in the highest position in the kingdom, to serve. He who would be the greatest must be a slave, must be a servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Here you have the disciples again coming to him. It all started with the mother of Zebedee's sons, James and John, sons of Zebedee, sons of thunder. He called them from serving with their father to come and serve him. Now their mother had traveled with them on occasion, and here she is with them again. She goes to Jesus wanting her sons to be in the highest places. A mother's ambition. But they didn't say, no, Mom, no, we don't do it. We don't want it. but they were right there. Kind of like waiting to see what Jesus says. If he says, yeah, okay, then they'll be stepping up. Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Jesus. Well, thank you. They'll be right there to go ahead and do it. But then when the other disciples heard, they were mad. Why were they mad? Mad because they didn't think of it. Mad because if Jesus had said, yes, James and John, sons of Zebedee, would have been over them. Mad because when you hear about something like that and it causes you anger, causes you stress, strife, why? Because it works against what we want. If it's causing us that anger and that strife, if it's causing us to be mad at that person who possibly could have been promoted over us, then we know it was about us. It was something about us. It was something about us. Not necessarily wanting to be in that position, but maybe not wanting to be under that person. Maybe not getting that position, or just whatever. But if it's causing us anger, there's something about us that causes that. That caused that. called them all together. Mom included. So this is how you get to be great in the kingdom. This is how you get exalted. This is how you get lifted up. Because again, he says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Just like those who pursue public position for personal gain. Just like those who pursue high positions for personal gain. That's what the Gentiles would do. That's what the Gentiles were guilty of. Everybody knows that. Everybody knew that. He knew that. And he was bringing it out to them in that point. He said, not so among you. Not so with you. This is how they do it. But he is speaking a command. He is speaking a declarative statement. Not so with you. Whoever would be the greatest, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. He didn't just speak this. He didn't just put it out there. He didn't just say it. He demonstrated this, remember, with the washing of the feet. He demonstrated everything that he put out there, all the principles that Jesus put out there, stuff that he demonstrated. He lived it out sincerely before them. And he let them know. And that's his instruction about ambition. Ambition. Don't let your ambition, it's good to have ambition, but don't let it drive you to promote yourself, to exalt yourself, to get yourself put up to the highest position. So I'll give you this as an example real quick. In the NBA, just using it as an example, whenever a player wants to be the highest paid person on the team, whenever they want to be the highest paid, this, that, and the other, whenever they want to be the highest paid, they sign that contract, they pretty much just doom their team to not win a championship. Because that team's not going to be able to afford to pay anybody else. So if anybody's any good, they can't pay them now because they're paying you all of this money. Miami Heat, they were an anomaly. Because those three, they got paid, it was $117 million each, for the life of their contract. But they were only 2 for 4 in the championship. So there was no guarantee. But in the end, they ended up, LeBron ended up leaving. But as the general example goes, as soon as you become that highest paid player, as soon as you sign that gigantic contract for yourself, you pretty much doom your team to not win a championship, to not be a winner. So would you rather be a winner, or would you rather be the highest paid? Would you rather be about a team that plays well, is going to be remembered for having been a championship, or are you going to do you want to be just the highest paid player for this period of time? Because somebody's going to come along, and they're going to earn more money. They're going to earn more money. Who won the national basketball championship, 1996? Chicago Bulls. Who won it the 2 years before that? Chicago Bulls. Who won the 2 championships after that? Houston Rockets. Who won the 3 after that? The Chicago Bulls. Who was the highest paid player during any of those times? I don't know. The champions get remembered, not the highest paid players. The champions get remembered. So if you're about the legacy, if you're about being remembered, then you want to be a part of a team. If you're just out for yourself, if you want to be the highest paid and not be remembered by anybody, then that's what you're going to go for. And that's the difference here. If you want to be remembered as part of the kingdom, then you're going to be a part of the team. You're going to be a part of the church. You're going to be a part of the body. Amen. But if you're all out for yourself, seeking a title, seeking something, anything other than that, seeking to have a title, seeking to have a position, seeking to just have, a venue so that you can get out what is in your mind that you need to say, then you're going to be all by yourself. You're going to be that highest paid, but you're going to be all by yourself, and you will not be remembered. And see, the thing is, with the NBA, it's the fans who remember. In the kingdom, it's God who remembers. It's God who remembers. Because we decided to be decided not to exalt ourselves. We decided not to gather every title, position to ourselves, but we decided to humble ourselves, as Christ said, because we decided to be that servant. That's who God's going to remember. That's who God's going to remember. And we will stand before him, and he will say, well done, my good and faithful servant.
Amen.
Come and enter into rest. Instead of, because that person who wanted to be the highest paid, that person who wanted that position, that person who wanted, they might walk themselves right out of God's will. They might stand before the Lord and say, God, depart from me. I knew you not. I never knew you. Because if that person is all about self, it's all about, I got to get to this position. I got to get there so I can say what it is I need to say. Depart from me. I knew you not. So, Jesus, he knows what time it is in regards to his ministry. He knows the time is drawing near. So in light of all the rejection that has just taken place, the pinnacle, the concentrated period of rejection that has just taken place, he knows that his time is just about up. So he has to begin to prepare his disciples. He began with revealing who he was. Then he finished off with instructing them in the word. Instructing them, reminding them, equipping them, and empowering them to carry out the